everyone. Okay, so this video is going to be my Lady Midnight book review. I finished this book a few days ago and it was amazeballs, and I'm really bad at doing book reviews because I always do them like much later after I finish the book because I just don't know why I am the way that I am. But yeah, I finished this week and I'm gonna review it, and let me just say that Cassandra Clare has done it again with her storytelling, because this was just a wonderful novel of amazingness. So before I get started, I just want to talk about this cover because it is absolutely gorgeous. Do you see all the tabby tabs? Yeah, but this cover is absolutely gorgeous. This is my favorite. Okay, this is not my favorite, but I think it is my second favorite of all of the covers. The old ones, not including the new ones with all the stuff on the spines. But my first favorite will forever and always be Clockwork Princess. I absolutely adore that cover. Or you know what? We have a whole bunch more covers to come out, like with the Last Hour series. So I wonder what kind of dealio that's gonna go with, since they all have since each series has its own type of cover. So yeah, still to talk a little bit more about the cover, that I absolutely adore it. This blue, I don't know if you can with the light, it does that as if you're underwater and the sun, and it's just so pretty. Oh my goodness. So that is apparently that's Emma, and so there's a few scenes in this book where she's in the water. She's afraid of the water, and so it's very symbolic of her fear for that, and for her parents and all that. And still talking about covers, so I know that they said that the Costco edition of this book was going to have a special jacket art on the inside. And so yeah, you see this book. So I had already pre-ordered a copy from Barnes & Noble, but and then I found out about the Costco edition, so now I have two. But I am giving this one, or I'm gonna sell it to one of my friends because she wants to read it, and I am all for having two copies, but I actually spent the money for two copies, so yeah. But yeah, anyways, the Costco jacket art. So the Costco jacket art. I know that Clockwork Princess and City of Heavenly Fire both have jacket art on the inside of the jacket, and I love when books have extra stuff like that, when there's stuff in the cover, when it comes with I know that City of Fallen Angels has Jace's letter in it, and I adore it so much. And so I had to get this with the jacket art because I just love it. Look at it. It's so beautiful. It has all the characters except for one. Cassandra Clare said except for one because of spoilers. Yeah, I saw this online first and I was just like, oh my god, what is that? And so yeah, it has all of the characters. It has I don't know if you can see, but it has Jason Clary, Simon, Isabel, Alec right there, and then that's Emma and Julian next to Clary, and then that's Perfect Diego and Ty and Mark and Christina and Malcolm and all of them, just all of them. Okay, so now that I'm done rambling about the covers inside and out because they are marvelous, let me start with my review. So the way that I do my book reviews is I put a lot of tabs in the book as I read along, and then when I do my review, I kind of just go through every tab and just talk about whatever it is that I marked. And so that's what we're gonna do. So this might seem very rambly and very just all over the place, but just, this life. So just, we're gonna roll with it. Okay, so we start off with the prologue, and it's with this new character that we've never met before. Okay, I'm just gonna take this off because I don't want to ruin it. With the kid named Kit. But as we know, this book takes place in Los Angeles, and that was one thing that I was really happy to see with this book, and where the setting was because I live in California, and I don't live in LA or anywhere near it really, but a few hours away. And I've been to LA, and it was cool because the whole ambiance of the setting and having to drive places rather than walk or get a subway like it was in the other books. It was really cool because that's what you do here? So, yeah, that was really cool to read. Anyway, so we have this kid named Kit, and he's talking, and he's walking, and he's talking about he has a dad named Johnny Rook. So, my first notes here, I couldn't even get 5 pages in without putting my first note. So, on page 4, he is walking along, and he's like, oh, he smiled at 2 people walking by, a tall, good-looking boy with a streak of white in his dark hair and a brunette girl whose eyes were shaded by sunglasses. So first thought, I'm like, streak of white? Is that Jem and Tessa? And what do you know? Later on, we learn in the book that it was. So as of page 4, I was already on top of it because I knew who that was. Okay, then also on page 7, they're talking about the Parabatai bond. And so Kit was like, oh, Kit looked at the pair with the blah, blah, blah. Everybody who knew about Nephilim knew what Parabatai were, 2 shadow hunters who swore to be platonically loyal to each other forever. And so that's the first time that I can remember hearing the Parabatai bond be described as a platonic love. I mean, I know that it is, and I'm sure that they have described it that way before, but I thought it was very, like the word platonic was used specifically because of the relationship between Emma and Julian. And so I thought that was very interesting because I was like kind of foreshadowing that the Parabatai that we were going to learn about we're not gonna have a platonic love, and then they didn't. Oh my goodness. Okay, so then on page 8 we have our first mention of Jace and Clary, and I found it so funny because throughout this entire book, whenever Jace and Clary came up until like the very end, it was always Jace Herondale and Clary Fairchild. It was never just Jace and Clary. And I have a note here basically that is weird because like we feel that we know them, and we do. So we were there when they were like, you know, training, and they weren't the best necessarily, and Clary was still a mundane, and so it's crazy to hear like them talked about in such a renowned way like that. I guess it's cool. It's funny because I almost feel like a parent. I'm like, oh, all my little childrens are all grown up and they're just the best shadow hunters in the world, and it just, I don't know. And we're introduced to Christina already, and Julian and the Blackthorns are not in the beginning of the book yet, and so they come a little bit later on, like the next chapter or something. So we have Christina, and she's our new character that we've never seen before, and she was my favorite character in the book. Christina Rosales was my fave. She was, I just loved her personality so much. I loved Emma and Julian, but one thing I realized reading this book, that they weren't my favorite couple, and they also weren't my favorite Parabatai from the Shadow World that we've read. Not to say that I didn't love them, because I loved Emma and Julian so much, but I just favored like Clary and Jace, and then Will and Jem for the Parabatai. And so, yeah. I have another note here. Because Christina is from the Mexican Institute. She's from Mexico, and she's here on that, like, trip that all shadow hunters need to do when they're training, where they need to go to another institute. And so Christina's English was nearly accentless, and Emma often forgot it wasn't her first language. On the other hand, Christina spoke 7 languages on top of her native Spanish. Emma spoke English and some scraps of Spanish, Greek, Latin, could read 3 demon language, and swear in 5. And I just have a note here that says impressive. And then we have our first like kind of glimpse into how there's a plane out there with the thing. Oh, is that Geico? Okay. And then on page 29, there's another mention of our lovely Infernal Devices characters, and Emma's talking about, oh, I only ever knew one decent silent brother, and he quit being one. And I'm just like, Jem. Also, okay, and then Emma, she has this very Stilinski trait of her, and when she has it in her closet, she has that whole what's it called? Her wall of crazy, as Julian calls it, that she says right here. And it has all of the clues and all of the things that she's ever found in regards to her parents' death. And so that's like the big thing. And I was very, very pleasantly surprised with this book, because my thing was, okay, this series is going to be about finding out what happened to Emma's parents. And that was solved in this book. And so I don't even know. I mean, I'll get to that at the end of the video with the epilogue, but I was so happy. This book was, despite it being the first book in a series, it was such a well-rounded book, and it was like it was a complete story all in itself, and like there's obviously going to be a lot more to come, and I'm beyond excited for that, because like what's set up for the rest of the books, it just sounds super duper exciting. But yeah, so we find out what happens to Emma's parents in this book, and that was something that I was very happy. Well, I mean, not, it was sad, but I was happy to like figure it out in this book so that we didn't have to wait for like the next one or even the third one. And then on page 61, this was just a quote that I kind of liked, and this is something that Arthur said. You know, Julian and all the Blackthorns, their uncle, on their dad's side, and he's like, "Life is short and wisdom long to learn." And I don't know, I just kind of liked that. That quote. I feel like that's something that Magnus would say. All right, so then on page 69, Emma's having a conversation with Julian? Yeah, Julian. And so they happen to mention the Jace and Clary and how they're running the New York Institute. And so I was just that was another pleasant surprise too, that Jace and Clary kind of rose to the occasion to become the, what's it called? Running the New York Institute. Okay, and then on page 89, we are introduced to the Malcolm Fade character, and he is the High Warlock of LA. I have mixed feelings about this character, because as we know, he's the one who betrays them, and they even mention it. I don't know if I have a note for it, but they even mention it later on. I think when Julian and somebody were having a conversation, and they're like, yeah, that, you know, Jason, Clary, and all of them, in the New York Institute, they were betrayed by one of their own. They were betrayed by their own tutor. And so, you know, then suspicions rise for Diana, but then those quickly go away because, like, obviously she's not doing anything. And he comes into this book very, like, as a very likable character, which is what made, of course, the reveal at the end even more shocking, because it's like, really? No, like, we trusted him. Okay, and I already knew this, but then on page 98 we get, it says Emma, Claire, blah blah blah, Clary's best friend in Parabatai, Simon. And this, the feels, you guys, that Clary and Simon became Parabatai is just so wonderful, and I love that. And then it was so funny. I seriously laughed out loud when they were getting the pizza from that the vampire guy, and he was wearing a shirt and it said, "Oh, the Mortal Instruments, they're a band from Brooklyn. You heard of them?" And so, like, the fact that they became, I mean, I kind of already knew this because they named themselves the Mortal Instruments at the end of City of Heavenly Fire, but they kind of blew up a little bit, and that's just that. That's amazing. And then on page 102, we get our first thing of Church. And so Church is now at the LA Institute. And this is because Jem sent Church to them, and he told them to look after them. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful little character, little kitty cat to have. And it's just amazing. Okay, and then we get our first kind of like hint that Julian loves Emma, and so he tells her, he's like, I don't know if I would have wanted a Parabatai. And this was like our first thing. They kind of have an argument about it, but not really later on. And so this is their first time where Julian kind of expresses his feelings on that. He doesn't really express it till later, but that's like the first hint that we get. Okay, and then we get this really interesting new addition to like the Shadow World, and it's a Golemans, I believe it's pronounced, and they train centurions. And so this reminded me of like that Nanda Parbat. I don't know if that's what they called it in Arrow, but anyways, I am like so intrigued by this Golemans. I don't know, it's just super interesting, and I want to learn more about it. And I have a feeling that in later books that they're going to actually, like, they're gonna travel there, and that'll just be like the coolest scene ever. And then they have Diego. Oh my goodness, Diego. Oh my goodness, Diego. Oh, okay, and then we get the scene where the fairies come to the Institute, and it's Kieran, Mark, and then that other one that I am forgetting right now. Oh, it was Earlith. Hirelith? I don't even know how to pronounce that fairy's name. But it was really funny. I have a note here where, because you know how the fairies can't lie, so they just say everything like willy-nilly. And so Lilith was like, oh, you've always been partial to blondes. It's so funny because Emma's like, okay, seriously, I am right here, and I was not aware I was being invited to a game of who's the hottest. And I love her feistiness. I loved Emma's personality and like everything about her. Like, she was selfish and selfless at the same time, and that it's just like two traits that I'm always attracted to. Like in like Triss and Divergent, she's like, oh yeah, that I was selfless and I was brave and I was selfish too. And so like caring for yourself, but then also deeply caring for other ones, that's always like what I love in characters. And she was like that, and it was wonderful. Oh my goodness. And then Mark. So the fairies come and they're telling them like, we need a favor and we're gonna give you Mark to, you know, figure out this thing that we need you to figure out. And so they pull back the thing and it's Mark. And so Julian and Emma and the Blackthorn kids have not seen Mark in 5 years, and Mark has been in the fairy world and he hasn't aged like a day barely. And so this is the first time that they're seeing their brother after all this time. And so even like reading that part in the book, it's like, oh my god, he's here, he's in the world, he's in front of us. And it was just crazy. Okay, so then Mark, you know, comes into the institute and then they take him. And so there's a part on 155 that I have a note here that's like, I don't know what I'm writing. And so they go to Malcolm talking to him, and then all of a sudden, so I'm thinking, I'm like, I wonder if Malcolm and Magnus would like get along, if they're like friends, because they hadn't really mentioned it to this point. And so I have a note here, I'm like, I was literally just thinking of if he and Malcolm would get along, because Magnus just appears. And so I of course freaked out because my Magnus was in the book. And that was another thing. I was so happy reading this book that I know that this book was about Emma and Julian and the Blackthorns and all that, but what's it called? I was very happy and pleasantly surprised to see that Jace and Clary and Magnus and all of them were at least mentioned a whole bunch of times throughout this book. And so that was something, it like gave us a little bit of our old characters, and it was just really nice. Okay, and then this was one of my favorite parts. Magnus on page 158, he's talking to them, and then what's it called? Something, Malcolm is talking, and Magnus is like, oh, one of those hopeless humans is the father of my child, Magnus pointed out. And I was just like, oh my god, Malik. I even have a note here, I don't know if you can see that, it's like fangirl mode activated, because it was seriously activated. I was flailing about. So on page 178, it's just like a little note that I had, and it's Livi is talking, and she's like, oh, having someone who's sworn to shield you from danger, said Livi, her eyes shining. Someone who would put their hands in a fire for you. And so the first thing that came to my mind was in that Infernal Devices scene. He just twitched. Where, Jem threw his box of the drugs into the fire, and then Will went and like burned himself trying to get it. And so that was the first thing that came to mind. And then they mentioned it, and so I have a note here. I'm like, I literally just thought of this before I read it where they mentioned it. Okay, then another part on 193, they are in Julian's room, his painting room, like his artist room where he does all of his art. So there's a room in that room that nobody is allowed to go in. Emma isn't even allowed to go in there. And so of course my first thought is that has to be a room where Julian just paints and draws Emma. That has to be like that scene in 50 First Dates where she takes him into that room and she's like, I've been seeing you and I've been remembering you, and it's just all pictures of him. And so it turns out being that towards the end, because he takes her in there. But I just knew it from that moment when he said even Emma wasn't allowed to be in there. That's because he probably had, and he did have, just a whole bunch of paintings and drawings and everything of Emma. And so that just made my heart flutter. And then there's another Clace mention of when Emma and Mark went on that the steed, the motorcycle. And so there was a mention of that one scene in City of Bones where Clary and Jace go on that motorcycle, on the demon-powered motorcycle, and they go flying, and I'm just like, oh, that was a nice reminder. And then on page 242, this is another just quote that I really liked, and it said, we can be cruelest to those who remind us of ourselves. Okay, and so then on the page right next to that, on page 243, we get our first kind of clue as to Ty. And so they mention the fact that he, you know, sees things a little bit differently. And so I'm over here thinking, okay, is he dyslexic? And so you know, we learn later on that he has signs of like autism. And so Ty is such a brilliant character. Oh my goodness, so smart, so intuitive, so just, it was an amazing character. Out of all of like the younger Blackthorn children, he was my favorite one. And so I like how Cassandra Clare included that, you know, in the book for a little bit more, you know, representation. Then it also, you know, shows a little bit more of how the clave treats people that are different, and how they're just cast away. And so Julian obviously, you know, loves his brother, and he's like, there's nothing wrong with him, and there's nothing wrong with Ty. He just, you know, is a little bit more sensitive, and he just sees things more intensely, and he is, you know, there's nothing bad because of that. He's just a little different, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so Julian is trying to protect his brother because he knows how the clave is towards people like that. And just like with Arthur and how he was hiding things for all these years with Arthur, and yeah, I just really, I like that aspect of these characters. Oh, okay, and then this whole relationship between Christina and Mark. I was kind of spoiled at like some kind of ship or relationship between the two of them. And so, at the beginning, I was like, yeah, totally ship Mark and Christina. But now, like, towards the end of the book, I obviously ship Emma with Julian, like, obviously. And I am leaning towards, Christina with Diego, because I feel like that's something that they can repair between themselves, and that they can like continue to be a couple. And but besides that, even like in a friendship way, I really loved the relationship between Mark and Christina. It was a very affectionate and very understanding between the two of them, and I really loved it. Like, they showed Mark kind of like Christina was the first person that Mark let himself like open up to when he came back, because he was trying to adjust, and she was the first one. And so then we have that scene with like her cutting his hair, and then like him looking into her eyes to see his reflection, and that was just a really nice scene, and I really enjoyed that scene, despite, you know, me not shipping with each other towards the end. And so I wasn't necessarily surprised that Mark chose his family towards the end, but the fact that Kieran, with that whole whipping situation towards the end, that was definitely an involving factor as to why Mark chose his family, because, I mean, he can't let anybody hurt his family. If you love someone, you don't do things that will hurt them, and that includes hurting people that they love. Like, even if you don't like that person, you don't hurt them, because that would hurt the person that you love, and it's like, that'll just mess things up for your relationship. And Kieran obviously did not understand this, and so Mark, was why he chose his family. Okay, and then later on, there's the part where Emma went to the Convergence, and she was sucked into the ocean through that portal in that cave. And so we already know her past with her parents and the sea, and how like she found her parents and they were soaked in salt water and with the markings on them and everything. And so we already know her relationship with the sea and how she does not like it. And so that was really scary for her. That was really scary for me for her when she was in there, and she was like, couldn't breathe, and there were things going around her, and she was like freaking out, and it was just very scary. Okay, and so at this point we're about halfway through the book, and this is the part everyone, where I wasn't expecting this. Julian and Emma, them on the beach, I was not. So Julian is the one that saves her, and oh my god, I was not expecting this until the end of the book. Before I read this, I thought this was going to be something that like they were going out their feelings to each other at the end of the book. I was not expecting it halfway through. And so, I mean, they just let everything out, and they do everything on this one day, on this first time that they're finally like admitting their feelings to each other. And so yeah, I was not expecting that. I thought that was going to be like a bigger deal towards the end, and I mean, and it was a big deal. Ooh, and then there's a part where they're all fighting. They're all going after this guy, and Christina and Emma run into Perfect Diego. And so I was not expecting this. I knew that he was a character. We didn't get Jamie, or I read it as Jaime, but we didn't get him. You know, Christina's was going to be Parabatai, and so I wasn't expecting to see either of those two characters until the next book. But we got Diego in this book, and I already love him also. Quite an amazing character. I feel I pictured him as the Mexican version of Jace. So can you imagine? Oh my. And so chapter 19, Diego is like, oh, I thought it was you, but I wasn't sure. What are you doing here? Why are you trying to protect this man? Or he says in Spanish. Let's see if I can say this in Spanish without sounding like I have an accent. He's like, oh, Christina, pensé que eras tú, pero no estaba seguro. ¿Qué haces aquí? ¿Por qué estabas tratando de proteger a este hombre? Did I do good? I am Mexican and Cuban, and I cannot speak fluent Spanish. Like, I'm a very good Latina. No, not really. But yeah, I know enough Spanish to understand that without having to look it up, so I was good. I need more Diego fan art. If we can make that happen, I would be forever grateful, because I would love to see more Diego fan art. Diego and Christina fan art. I want more of that. And that's one thing that I really loved about this book, is that like half the characters basically, well, Christina and Diego, were, you know, Mexican, and I really loved that that representation was put into this book, and that they were you know, big characters are going to be in the rest of the series, and Christina being my favorite character. And I just love that, you know, they had the Spanish in there, and they had like the Mexican Institute references and all of that, with like the flowers and this and that. And I just really love that representation in this book, because as we all know, representation is extremely important in books and movies and TV and life. And so I just really love that Cassandra Clare decided to put these characters in this book, and I absolutely adored them, and I cannot wait to read more about Christina and Diego. I can't wait to meet Jaime, or Jamie, whatever. I can't wait to meet him. I want a conversation between him and Christina, so they can like patch things up.